Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to use Pyenv, also known as Pyenv, on a Windows-based operating system. It's a really handy little tool that you can use on the command line to manage as many different versions of Python as you need for your software development needs. I'm going to show you how to install it, configure it, use it like a champ. I'm also going to show you how you can integrate it with VS Code, a very popular text editor for your Python development. So, let's get to it. Okay, so let's just quickly touch on what Pyenv actually is and why you might want to have it installed on your Windows system. So to start with, it's a free open source command line tool. Its main goal is to simplify the process of installing and switching between multiple versions of Python. It's pretty common for Python developers to utilize different versions of Python based on the needs of a particular project they might be working on. So having a tool that lets them easily manage and alternate between those versions is really handy. So to help illustrate the value of this tool, I've already gone ahead and navigated to the official Python website, python.org, and I've gone to their downloads page. And I just wanted to show that this is the traditional way that you would install Python for Windows, is you would just come in here. You can pick the latest version by clicking this button. You could also go through and download any old version that they have available through their downloader. But every time you do this, you'd be doing a full-on installation, usually using a installer that's built for Windows. The other way you can do it is you can actually use the Windows App Store and you can install it that way. The issue with doing that is that when you install Python using one of the pre-made installers, it does a lot of configuration to the path on your system, and it can be very tedious and annoying to try to switch between the two. It's also kind of cumbersome to know which version of Python you're running at any given moment, which is why Pyenv is a really handy tool. So if we're not going to use the traditional Python installation way, let's figure out how to do this with Pyenv. The way you're going to want to do that, or the way you might start doing that, is going over to the official GitHub page for Pyenv. Like I said, it's a free open source tool, so it has a GitHub page. You can come over here, you can scroll on down, it'll tell you everything you want to know about the tool. My hope in making this video is that I'm going to simplify this because there's a lot of information on the documentation on this website, and I'm just going to try to get you going as quickly as possible. Now, something to keep in mind is that if you were to come in here and go to their installation section, you'll notice they have a section for each major operating system, and we're going to be focusing today on Windows. But if you click on the Windows details, you'll notice it'll say Pyenv does not officially support Windows, and you might immediately be like, that really sucks. Well, don't worry, they also point out that there is somebody who has made a fork of Pyenv, and it is called Pyenv Win. And this version is the exact same thing as Pyenv, except that it was developed specifically to run on the Windows operating system, which is great for us. So I've already gone to that page, and that would land you right here. So I'm just going to walk through the installation procedure that they have outlined on this page. It's pretty straightforward. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll on down a little bit. We can go past most of this introduction stuff since I've already kind of talked about that. But the thing we want to focus on is the quick start. Now they want you to use PowerShell to do the installation, and honestly it probably is the fastest and easiest way. So the easiest thing you're going to do here is you're just going to take this little bit of code, you're going to highlight it, you're going to copy it, and then you're going to open up PowerShell. Now if you don't know how to do that, you just click on the window key in the bottom left, come up here and just type PowerShell, and you'll see Windows PowerShell is one of the options that pops up. It'll open up the PowerShell window. I'm dragging it over. Okay, so now that we have it open, actually the very first thing we're going to want to do is check to make sure that our system is capable, our PowerShell system is capable of running a PowerShell script, which is what this walkthrough is wanting us to do. The easiest way to check this is to just run a specific PowerShell command called get execution policy, and you can actually just start typing it and get about here and hit tab and it'll just fill in the rest. So you want to run get execution policy. When you do that, you're going to hit enter, and then something will show up on the screen right underneath that. Now some of you, this might be, you might say things like unrestricted or remote signed or all signed or something like that. There's a bunch of options that could come out here. The one that we are trying to get around here, the one that we don't want, is the one that showed up for me right now, which it says restricted. And what this is basically going to do is it's going to prevent us from running any PowerShell scripts. This is the default execution policy for Windows 11, I believe, for their Home Edition. So it's not at all uncommon if you get into this and this is what you see. So the easiest way to get around this is that we're just going to change the execution policy really quick so that we can run that PowerShell script. To do that, all we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just close this PowerShell session, right, by clicking that little X. We're going to go down here to the bottom again, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type PowerShell just like I did last time. But instead of just immediately clicking on this when it comes up, I'm actually going to right click on it and I'm going to run it as administrator, okay? And that's going to bring up this little window right here that's just basically asking me, hey, are you sure you want to let that happen? And I'm going to be like, sure am, hit yes. Okay, then that's going to bring this one up. I'm going to go ahead and go right over here now. Now I'm going to this is now running PowerShell, but as an administrator. This is what's going to allow us to actually change the execution policy. And then what we're going to want to do now is actually set the execution policy by running the set execution policy command. Now, there's going to be a bunch of options that you can pick here. You're welcome to go research this on your own to figure out which one you would like to do for your system. But if all you want is sort of the bare minimum to make it so that you can actually run this script to install Pyenv, then what you're going to want to do here is remote signed. So remote, you can just start typing it, and you just type remote and hit tab, it'll fill in the rest. Remote signed is sort of that nice policy that'll let us run this script. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to prompt me to say, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Because there might be implications if you do this. I'm going to say, yep, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to hit Y here to let it know, yes, I'm well aware of what I'm doing, right? And then that's all you have to do. Now, after you do that, there's really no reason for you to keep using the administrator mode. You can continue running PowerShell as an administrator, but it's a little dangerous because it lets you do things you're not really necessarily wanting to do all the time. So I'm just going to go ahead and recommend you just close that and then just reopen PowerShell now, like this, and then you just left click on it like you did last time, and you're going to just bring it right on back over here like we did last time, and that should pretty much get you exactly where you want to be. And now when we run get execution policy again, now we should see remote signed here. So this is exactly what we needed. We can actually move forward with running the script from the web page. So again, I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to go ahead and just highlight this whole thing right here. You should be able to just right click, and if you right click into the PowerShell window, you will see everything that you just copied from the previous window get pasted straight in there. Once you've done that, all you have to do is hit enter. It might take a moment to install, so just be patient. Okay, great. Assuming nothing bad happened during your installation, you should see something on the screen that looks just like this, and it'll have a nice message saying Pyenv-win is successfully installed. It's also letting you know you might need to close and open your terminal again, which is probably a good idea. So I'm going to go ahead and just close it, and I'm going to go right back over here. I'm going to open up PowerShell again. Drag it on over, and you can pretty much verify that it worked by just typing pyenv-version. Right? And notice I now have Pyenv 3.1.1. Before I installed it, I would have ran this exact same command and I would have got a big old red error saying not detected, not known, we don't know what this is. So this is your way of verifying. Now that we got everything installed, which was a pretty easy procedure, the next thing we're going to do is jump into how to use this tool to both install and manage different versions of Python. The very first command that you're going to want to know how to do is list out all of the available versions of Python that Pyenv gives you. So the way to do that is you just have one simple command, Pyenv, and then you type install, right? This is actually the command you'll use when you want to actually install a specific version of Python, but you can also use it for listing out all of the available versions. There's a couple different ways you can do this. You can type -L and that will list it out. I believe you can also type 2 dashes and then actually type the word list. And ultimately, when you do this command, it's going to produce a list of all of the available versions. So I'm going to hit enter. And indeed, I have a list of all of the available versions of Python that Pyenv gives you. So you can scroll up, you can see it's a pretty long list. Python's been around for multiple decades, and so it has accumulated a long list of versions. So you can see this goes all the way back up to version 2.4. So I'm just going to quickly describe how to interpret most of these version numbers. Some of them might seem a little bizarre to you if you're not familiar with them. So just so you know, if you see something that says -win32 and then you see the exact same one that doesn't have that. So for instance, we have 2.5-win32, and then we have one here that says 2.5 with no -win32. What this is showing you is that there are two different versions of the 2.5 version of Python. I know there's two versions of a version, right? This version of it is actually the 32-bit version of Python for version 2.5, and this is the 64-bit version of 2.5 Python. So the main reason that they offer both these up is that it's possible that you're running an older version of the Windows operating system, and if you're using a 32-bit operating system, then you're going to want to install the 32-bit version of the Python version you're trying to install. If you were trying to install 2.5 for a 64-bit operating system, then you'd want to pick this one. So that's really the main difference between the 32 and the not 32. If you scroll down a little bit more, you're going to see that it's pretty much true for all these other ones. You might also see these things that are, say, things like RC, that's for like a release candidate. Most of the time, you probably just want to skip over those because those things were developed when they were first considering putting out a version of Python. They're not usually the official version. So you probably want to stick with the ones that either are the Win32 versions if you're on a 32-bit operating system, or just the straight up number without any dash afterwards if you're on a 64-bit operating system. You can also scroll down far enough and you might find that there are a few other things that aren't just straight numbers. So if we come down here, we have to go way down. You might also notice they have some versions of PyPy, which is another variant of Python that's actually built using a completely different system. I'm not going to be touching on that during this tutorial, but just recognize that Pyenv will give you access to that if you want to use it for that purpose. Okay, so now that we've seen all of the different versions of Python that we have available, the next command I'm going to show you is how to tell which versions of Python you have already installed on your system using Pyenv. And the way you do that, you just do Pyenv versions. Okay, so that's the command you want to do here. And if you type Pyenv and you type versions, right now you'll notice nothing happened. It didn't list anything. And that's because up to this point, I have not actually installed any versions of Python using Pyenv, which is why it just came back with an empty list. So let's pick a version of Python and go ahead and install it using Pyenv. Now, just for the purposes of this video, I'm going to go ahead and pick a relatively old version of Python and a relatively new version of Python, just so I can demonstrate how you might switch between the two and to showcase that they are in fact different versions that are running. So for my older version, let's see here, I think maybe we'll just go with maybe 3.5. So you can, of course, pick the specific version. You can pick a very specific version like 3.5.1 or 3.5.2. But if you just want the latest version of a particular like 3.5, let's say, you can just type 3.5 and it'll grab the latest stable version of that version. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go with Pyenv install, but at this time I'm going to type 3.5, okay? And that just tells me I want the latest version of 3.5. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And I'm going to fast forward through the install. Okay, now that that's done installing, let's go ahead and pick a relatively new version of Python. So I'm going to go back to the list and I'm going to say one of the latest versions. In fact, we could probably just go to the official download page and see what the latest at the moment of this recording is 3.13.5. So if I go back over here, if we go back to our list, 3.13.5 is in fact the latest version. So if I just pick 3.13, it will get me the latest stable version. So let's just do that. Boop, and 3.13 and install. Again, I'll fast forward. Okay, great. So now we should have two different versions of Python installed on the system using Pyenv. Again, I'm going to run that Pyenv versions command. So Pyenv versions, all right? And unlike the first time I ran it where I got nothing, now you'll see that it lists the two versions of Python that I have installed. Now, up to this point, I haven't told it which version I would like to use. So if I were to try to run Python, just the regular Python binary, and say, hey, tell me what version we're running, I'm going to get a message that says, hey, you haven't told me which version we're running, so you need to set that first. So this lets me lead into the different sort of commands you can use for setting the particular version of Python that you want to be using at any given moment and at any given level of the file system. So the very first one I'm going to showcase is Pyenv global. And the global command really does exactly what the name implies. It basically sets the version of Python globally throughout the system. So another way you can think of the global command is this is the default version of Python that will run on your entire system until you tell it a different global, or if you tell it a different version to use at a different scope of the file system. And we'll talk more about that as I go through. But for now, let's just go ahead and pick one of our two versions and set it globally so that when I run the Python command, it'll know, oh, that's the one I should use. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and pick the older of the two. I'm going to say 3.5.4. I'm going to say that's the global version of the Python. So we'll say Pyenv, okay, and then we're going to say global, just like that command right there says, and then we're going to say 3.5.4, okay. And by doing that, I have now told Pyenv this is the one that I should use every time. So now if I run python-v, I should see, yep, there. Now instead of giving me this weird command, it knows, oh wait, the global version of Python that we're using is 3.5.4. So that is the version that I should run. Every time I see the Python command now, I'm just going to assume, oh, we're using 3.5.4. Right? And then you can kind of prove that to yourself by doing exactly what I just did, which is python-v. This is basically just telling you what version of Python are we currently running if I run this Python command, right? Now, if I ever wanted to change the global to something else, it's very simple. You literally just run the exact same command and you just put a different number in. Again, it needs to be a number that corresponds with one that you've installed on the system. So again, if I were to change this to 13.5, right? And then I were to run python-v, now it's going to say the version of Python we're using is Python 3.5. Now I'm going to go ahead and stick it back to the older of the two just because I'm going to do some showcasing of how to change later on, and I'd like to start with the older one. Okay, so that's basically what global does. And the nice thing here about it is that it doesn't matter where I am in the file system. By setting it as the global version, that will be the version that it uses everywhere I go. So if I were to navigate down into, oh, let's say into the desktop, let's say on my system, right? And then I were to run python-v, it's still going to be 3.5.4. It's going to be it everywhere. That's what it means by global. It's saying this is what it is everywhere you go until I find something that tells me that it needs to not use the global system. That is sort of just my baseline. This is what I'm going to use. Okay. So that leads us into the next command that you can use for Pyenv, and that is their local command. Now, to demonstrate local, you really need to have a specific folder where you're doing project development. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to just show you that I have already created a folder on my desktop called Pyenv demo. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to navigate over to that section on the desktop. So I'm going to say cd Pyenv demo. Okay. And now that I'm in that directory, you can see that if you ls, you can see that I have exactly one file in there called pyenv testing.py. This is where I'm going to showcase later some code that I wrote just to demonstrate how the code would work in different versions. But for now, I am now actually in that folder. You can see, because here's the path I have on PowerShell. Okay, so once you navigate into a specific folder, let's say in this folder, I'm going to hold all of the project files for a specific project, specific Python development project. And that specific project needs to use a very specific version of Python. So again, if I were to run python-v right now, it's going to use the old one because that's what I have set globally. However, if you want to make a specific folder and all of its subfolders use a very specific version of Python and override whatever is set globally, that is where you would use the pyenv local command. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to type pyenv local this time instead of global, and I'm going to tell it in this particular folder, I would like to use version 3.13.5. I'm going to type it right. And that changed it. And now something interesting also happens when you do that. If I ls again, you're going to notice something different. Not only now do I have my pyenv testing like I did last time, but additionally, after running that command, it actually added another file, right? And this is actually a hidden file. So unless you are showing hidden files in your file explorer, You won't actually see it, but it's there. And what it does is it actually informs Pyenv that every time you go into this folder, you have a different version of Python that you should run. And indeed, now if I were to go Python-v, it's going to say 3.13 instead of 3.5. Right? So remember when I was previously it had that, now it has that. Now here's the fun part about this. If I go up a directory, so if I go back to, now I'm just back on the desktop, I've left that folder. I'm no longer in the Pyenv demo folder, right? Now I'm just on my desktop. If I do that and then I run Python-v, we're back to 3.5.4, okay? So that's kind of the magic of the local command, is that it basically will change the version of Python once you navigate into that folder. And indeed, it also works on any subfolder inside of that folder. So for instance, if I were to go back into Pyenv demo, okay, again, if I were to just run this command again, I'm back to 3.13, right? But now let's say I made a subdirectory, mkdir, I'll just call it sub for now. Okay, I just made a subdirectory, so you can kind of see now. Now I have three things in this folder. I have the file that was originally there, I have that hidden folder that was created, and I just created a subdirectory. Now let's go into the subdirectory, right? And now let's say I wanted to make another file. I'm just going to say set content, which is just a PowerShell command, and I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it myfile.txt, and I'm going to set the value of that to text in a new file. Okay, something like that, real simple. Okay, and now if I were to ls, you can see I have a new file in here called myfile.txt. If I were to now in this subdirectory go python -v, you'll notice that it's still set to 3.13. Even though I am now no longer in this folder, I'm actually just in a folder underneath it. And anything I did, if I were to run a file in here, I guess I should have made this a Python file, but if I had made a file in here and made it Python, I started running the code in this file, it would use this version. So again, you can put any code you want underneath that folder that you set as local, and all those subfolders will respect the local version that you've set. So that's sort of the value of the local command in Pyenv. The last command I'm going to show with Pyenv is one that actually didn't list immediately there, so I'm going to clear this out first. We're going to go back up a couple directories, so we'll go here. We're back on the desktop. Again, back on the desktop, meaning that if I run Python, again, we're going to go back to this. Another thing, actually, before I go too much further, is Pyenv. If you ever are unclear about how Pyenv has set up the versions, notice that when I run Pyenv versions and I've actually already established a version, it actually puts a star next to the active version that you're on. So in the desktop of the computer right now, it's using the global version. So it's even telling you that this is being set globally by the file, and this is actually where it keeps global settings, is in this section of the file system. If I were to go back down into Pyenv demo, and then I were to run Pyn versions again, notice now it's actually, see how the star is no longer next to 3.5, it's next to 3.13, and it's even telling you this is being set because that hidden file is, I detected this hidden file and it's telling me that this is the version that we should be using. So this is another way you can always tell what version you're currently using. Personally, I just like to use Python-v just because it's very straightforward. It just lets me know, hey, right now I'm using this. But that is sort of the way you can go about it. So that takes us to the last command for Pyenv that I want to talk about, and that is the Pyenv shell command. So global sets it for the entire file system across the board. Local will set it for a specific folder and all of the subfolders, but you can even get more granular than that. Let's say for some reason you wanted to open up a command shell and you wanted to start using a very specific version of Python, but only within that shell and not anywhere else. Well, they actually have a Pyenv shell command. So to help demonstrate this, this is what I'm going to do. Let's go ahead and run Python-v here. Okay, notice that I'm running 3.13.5 because that is the version that was set because of the Pyn versions, because I have set it locally, and that's why it has this file here. Okay, now let's say for some reason even though I'm in this folder and I had previously said every time you're in this folder, you should use this version. Let's say for whatever reason, just in this command shell, and when I say command shell, what I really mean is this window right here, okay, this PowerShell terminal. Running inside of this terminal is a shell. The shell that we're using right now is called Windows PowerShell. Okay, so if in this instance of PowerShell, I wanted to have it use a different version and override whatever the one that I previously set using that local command or even the global command, that is what pyenv shell does for me. So watch what I can do here. I can do pyenv shell. Okay, and now I'm going to go back to 3.5.4. So I'm going to say 3.5.4. Okay, and by doing that, what I've actually done is I've even overridden what the local had told me to do. So if I were to write python-v now we're back to 354, okay? Even though I'm still in this directory. Now the interesting thing about the shell command is that it is very specific to the shell I'm on right now. So for instance, if I were to create a different instance of PowerShell, so let's just do that by clicking this little plus sign right here. Okay, so if I were to go back over into that folder, so let's go cd desktop, and then we'll go into pyenv demo. Okay, so this is the same place I am right here, right? Pyenv demo, pyenv demo. Okay, by default, what should this be? 3.13. And why should it be 3.13? Because as we showed right here, that is what it was set, right? But in this shell, because I told it pyenv shell 3.5, for this particular shell, not this one, but this one, it's running Python 3.5.4 even though I'm in that directory. This one, since I didn't run the shell command, it's still running the original version that it should using the local command. So it's basically still set to Python 3.13.5. So the shell command is very nuanced in that if there is a situation where you would like to run a specific version of Python in a specific command shell that you're on at that moment, and this is usually because you just need to test something really quick and you don't want that change in the version to stick, then you would run the shell command. The second that I close this window, right, that shell command goes away and we're right back to using this again. Right, so notice that that's why when I opened up a whole new shell, it didn't keep using 3.5 even though I was in that folder. It went right back to what it was supposed to do, which was what I set for the local command. So again, if I go pyenv versions, right, I had set this here. That's what it's supposed to be. The only way this gets overwritten is if you do the pyenv shell, or if I had created yet another subfolder, I could do that. The other thing you can do for pyenv local, the only other way that you could overwrite it is you can actually unset it. So if you were in a folder that you had created and you were like, previously I had set this to a specific version of Python, and you were like, you know what, I don't really want to do that anymore for whatever reason. I just want to use whatever the setting is for, the file system above it. In this case, it would be whatever the global setting is. You can always do that by doing pyenv local and then just doing unset. You have to be in the directory that had previously been set using local, so which is the case right now in this pyenv demo. I did set it to local, right? But then you can say unset, and if you do that, right, and then let me ls show you, it actually got rid of that Python version file, right? So it completely got rid of it, and so by doing that, now if I were to run Python here, it's going to go back to 3.5.4 because that is the global version of Python set by pyenv. Okay, so those are the three main commands that you're going to use. Traditionally, you would probably just set global to the version of Python that you use most commonly in most situations. This often is whatever the latest version of Python is. But if you have a specific project that is using an older version of Python, that is where you would probably want to use pyenv local, set it on the root folder for that project, and that way every time you go into that folder, it'll just automatically start using the version of Python that you want. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show was how to use pyenv with a very popular text editor known as VS Code. VS Code is a text editor that is often used for all kinds of development, which includes Python development. So I've already installed VS Code on this machine. I'm not going to show how to do that. There are lots of tutorials online showing you how to install it on a Windows-based operating system. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to minimize this. I've already set it up so that whenever I right-click on a folder, I can go to show more options and I can click open with code. So that's what I'm going to do. Right, and this is Visual Studio Code. As you can see, as soon as I opened it up, I got this very simple interface. You can see over here on the left in the Explorer, it actually is showing me everything that's inside of the folder that I opened. So when I right-clicked on that folder and I opened it this way, it automatically just navigated me straight there. And you can see here's that subfolder that I had created for previously, and here's that file that I had told you I already written. I was sort of alluding to it a bit. If you click on the file, you'll see it just opens it up. So this is just a regular text editor. It's showing you all of the code that I had previously written. And I just wrote a really simple Python script just really to showcase some things. Now, I kind of was a little bit devious in that I went ahead and picked the versions of Python that I did just to showcase that some versions of Python have functionality that others don't. And so as a way to demonstrate that, I specifically picked one. The one that I picked was a particular feature that was added in Python version 3.6, and that is the introduction of f strings. Since I downloaded a version 3.5, that feature shouldn't be there. And the version in 3.12 obviously is well after that was added, so that one should be there. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run this script using the version of Python, the newer version, the 3.12 version that we had, or I believe it was 3.13. Beyond just having the text editor right here, the other thing we can do is actually, I'm going to get rid of this subfolder because I don't really need it anymore. You could right click in here and just hit delete. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and go up here and I'm going to click terminal, and that's going to open up a new terminal for me. Okay. Now, this terminal that's sitting right here is basically the same thing as this. Now, I say basically because there are a few little differences, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that because this is one of the areas where, in my opinion, VS Code and the folks at Microsoft who built and maintain this tool have kind of gone a little bit overboard, in my opinion, and I feel like there's so much bloat that's added into the version of PowerShell that they put into VS Code that it actually is more of a hindrance than it is a help. But I'm going to show you how you can kind of get around that. But by and large, it is the same thing as that. So that means everything that I could do here, I can also do here. And that is one of the advantages of using VS Code, is that I now have a nice integrated command line built right into the text editor. So I can switch between the two as often as I need to, and it's very convenient. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run Python really quick, Python-v, just like I did before. And as I expected, it is using 3.5.4 because again, that was the version that was set globally. So if I do Pyenv versions, just like I was doing before, you'll notice it says 3.5.4 because that is from the global version. Now let's say I want to go back to having this folder, this Pyenv demo folder, have a different version. So I'm going to set a local. I'm doing this repetition also to help kind of highlight how to use the tool. So Pyenv local. In this case, I'm going to set it back to 3.1, 3.5. Okay, and nice thing here about VS Code is that it also made it a little easier to see that hidden file show up because look, as soon as they ran that command, notice so it wasn't there previously, it was this Python version. Okay, if you're ever curious what's in that little hidden file, it's actually pretty simplistic. It literally is just the number representing the version that you are setting it to. So that's really all. It's pretty simple in what it's trying to do there. I do not advise ever messing with this file though. I don't advise ever editing this outside of using the pyenv commands because yes, it does. The commands will change that file if needed, but it also is clearly making changes to other configurations. And so if you just start messing with this file, it can actually kind of mess up Pyenv. So I would just ignore this for the most part. But I thought you might want to know what was in there. Anyways, I have Pyenv local set. So that means now if I run Python-v, we're back to Python 13.5, which this code that I wrote here should work just fine for that. So let's go ahead and do it. Let's say Python pyenv testing.py, and everything works splendidly. Okay, everything works great. Now, I don't expect this code to work perfectly if I switch over to Python 3.5.4. And the reason for that is, like I mentioned, this code is actually making use of a feature, the f-string syntax, that wasn't introduced until Python 3.6, I believe. And since I have a version here that's obviously prior to that, my expectation is that if I were to run this part of the code through that interpreter, the 3.5.4 Python interpreter, it is going to fail. So I can do this a couple different ways. The first way I'm going to do it is probably the most kind of heavy-handed way. I'm just going to get rid of the local, so it goes back to being the global setting. So let's go to pyenv local unset, right? And that got rid of the local one. So now if I come back in here and do python-v, my expectations is we're back to 3.5.4, right? And now if I try to run this, python pyenv testing, and as I expected, it has no idea how to do this command on line 8, right? Because I'm using an F string and it doesn't know how to do F strings. Okay, so that failed exactly the way I wanted it to fail. And also, hopefully, that highlights that these are in fact completely different versions of Python. They are actually being stored in completely different locations on your file system. That's how Pyenv is able to do that. It actually stores them in things that it refers to as a shim. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail, but if you're ever interested, you can go look it up on your own. All right, and that's working as I expected. Another way I could have demonstrated this is I could have actually, well, hell, let's just go back here. Let's just go ahead and put this back to local 3.13.5. Okay, so again, we're back to this. If I were to now clear all that and go back up to here and run it, now it runs perfect. Okay, but now let's say I didn't want to actually get rid of the local version that I had set. I just wanted to temporarily check to see if this is working the way I wanted it to work. Well, this is actually a situation where that wonderful shell command I mentioned would come into play. So let's say I just want to do pyenv shell. Right? And basically what I'm saying is for this specific shell instance, I'm going to change the version of Python that I'm using. So let's go ahead and change it over to, well, first let's figure out what the versions are, because if you can't remember, you can always just do that. I couldn't remember the specific number. So pyenv shell, and let's go back to 3.5.4. Okay, now I've changed it back to that. So now even though the version that should be set for the actual local is set to that, I have overridden that using the pyenv shell command. So now if I were to do python v, my expectation is now I'm running python 3.5. And again, if I were to try to run this file now using python 3.5, I'm going to get that error again. Okay. So again, just to showcase, that is exactly what this shell command was doing for me. It let me override the default version of Python that I was using at whatever scope of the file system I was currently set. Okay, so let's now quickly talk about some of the settings that are set up in VS Code. One of the first things I want to mention here, and this is what I was kind of pointing out before about the integrated PowerShell terminal that it gives you, is that it's set up this way, and they're doing their best, honestly, to try to give you a lot of functionality. But if you're just doing some real basic Python development, I have found that some of the integration features that they add automatically for you start to become a little bit cumbersome. And one of those is these little blue dots that it adds to the left. I think they're called like command actions or something like that. Yeah. And I believe the intention behind these is that they are supposed to make it a little easier. So like, let's say I wanted to rerun a command, I guess you could just, like, let's say if I wanted to rerun this command, you could just click the little dot and then you could rerun the command like that. I suppose that's useful, but more often than not, I find myself just accidentally clicking on this, or sometimes I just want to copy a part of it and I can't, and they're just kind of annoying. And the reason these are here is part of the integration, and you can kind of tell from this is what's going on, but if you hover over the PowerShell icon right here, you can tell how it's launching PowerShell. So you can see it's actually running PowerShell and it's passing it basically a script. And you can see where the script is right here. It's this thing that's called shell integration.ps1. That's a PowerShell script. Don't worry if you didn't really understand all of that, but the point here is that it's not running just out of the box vanilla PowerShell. It's running PowerShell, but then adding a bunch of extra stuff in here. If you don't want the extra stuff, I'm going to show you quickly how you can get rid of that. I'm not saying you have to do that, but if you're like me, this is annoying, and honestly, I just most times don't want it. So if you come over here to the the terminal section, you'll see this plus icon and you'll also see this little down arrow. If you click the down arrow, it'll actually give you the ability to run various versions or various shells for integrating with VS Code. Right now I'm using the default here, which is just PowerShell. If you have Git Bash, you can do that. You could actually use good old CMD in here. Apparently it also has some sort of JavaScript debugging tool. There's lots of stuff in here. But you can actually create your own, these are what are known as profiles. Okay, so each profile basically is launching a shell and it's doing it in a very specific way. And I've already showcased how this one is set up. So basically I want to create a nice simple PowerShell profile that doesn't add all of this extra nonsense into it that I don't want. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to configure the terminal settings. Okay, so by doing that, I can come over here. That's going to open up this new window. Okay, and this is basically letting me get over into the settings for really for VS Code in general. And we could have a whole video just on how to do this, but I'm just going to showcase some really simple settings you can set here to at least get rid of that kind of integration script from running every time you open up PowerShell in Windows. I don't particularly like using this graphical user interface they have. It is convenient for some stuff, but honestly, for the most control, I prefer to just edit a file. Ultimately, this whole thing is just being stored in a file, and you can always get to that file by going up to the top right and clicking this little thing that says Open Settings JSON. If you click on that, they'll take you here. And this is basically every setting that you've ever made for VS Code is set here. You can see I've already previously done some stuff like disabling Copilot and making it not do the startup editor and some other stuff. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some settings that you can use for getting rid of that profile. Or really what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a whole new profile. So I'm going to make it so every time you open up this window, there's going to be one more option that shows up here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click a comma here. And now I'm just going to go ahead and type in terminal integrated. And the nice thing here is you can see that it is kind of filling it in for me. Profiles, right? And then I'm going to go to Windows, okay? Because I'm obviously running this on a Windows machine. Okay, if you click enter right there, it's actually just going to default build a bunch of stuff for you. I don't really want most of this, but it's actually just building you out more or less the same ones that it already gives you for free. I don't really need these in here additionally, so I'm just going to get rid of those. I'm going to keep this first one here only because I'm going to borrow from it. So I'm going to create a whole new profile. Instead of just calling it PowerShell though, I'm going to call it PowerShell no profile. All right. Or I could even I could call it something else, like maybe vanilla or something, right? So basically, this is my way of saying, hey, this is just the vanilla version without any nonsense going on here, okay? So PowerShell vanilla is just going to run PowerShell. I'm going to borrow that same PowerShell command. This is actually nice because it is going to point me straight over to PowerShell. The difference here is that I'm not going to add that script in there. Instead, I'm going to very specifically tell it for the arguments to pass, I'm going to tell it no profile, okay? So basically what I'm telling it is don't use a profile at all when you run this version, my vanilla version of PowerShell. Just don't do it, okay? And I'll hit save. And just by hitting save right here, I have actually done exactly what I wanted to do. So if I were to come up here and I were to drop down menu now, you'll notice that one of the things that's there now is PowerShell vanilla, okay? And here's the cool thing. If you're in here right now, you can still see those blue dots. This is the original shell instance that I have. You can kind of think of this as like opening up, like earlier when I had this and then I opened up another tab, right? You can have multiple instances of the shell open at any given moment. You can do the same thing here. Here's one instance of it, right? And when I hover over it, you can see this is where the one that's doing all this other stuff, right? But now if I come over here and I pick vanilla, right, now I have two of them. And this one is my vanilla one, and look, no profile. And look what else isn't there. No more of those little blue dots. It's just the same thing as if I was running it right over here, which for me personally, I find to be much more useful, right? So it's just more comfortable and also lets me know that anything that I was doing over here previously, if I ever needed to switch over to just doing just straight PowerShell outside of VS Code, I can take whatever I was doing here, put it in here, and it'll work just fine. I don't have to worry about that integration script doing anything weird to it. I'm actually just going to get rid of the integration script. Well, maybe I'll wait just 1 second to do that. So now if I come in here and I do python-v, you'll notice everything should still be exactly the same. We're set to 3.13. We're set to 3.13 even though over here I'm set to 3.5. Why? Because over here I ran that shell command, right? And the shell command changed it just for that shell. Well, over here in this other shell, I'm not doing that anymore, right? Now if I want to run the code again, I can do Python Pyenv testing, right? And it works just fine. This one now works perfect because it's using the newer version of Python, so it knows what an if string is. So we're good to go there. And I can always close this other one by just hitting this little trash can icon next to it, and now this is the only one I'm using. The other thing you can do here is if you want to make it so that your PowerShell vanilla one is always the one that shows up, you can actually go right here. You can configure, select default profile, right? And then it'll ask you, hey, which one do you want to be the default one? Meaning every time you try to just create, you just hit this plus button, which version should you use? I want it to always use PowerShell vanilla, right? Just use vanilla. And you'll notice that when I did that, it actually just went ahead and added a line here to the settings.json. I could have just typed this out, but it was a nice little thing there. Let me do it. So there you have it. There it is. Okay, so that's the first little configuration that I like to recommend to people if they want to keep their PowerShell integration with VS Code real easy to understand and not muddled up with all of that extra stuff that Microsoft wants to give you. That's a nice, easy way to do it. Okay, last thing I want to show here for Python development in VS Code specifically is using the extension. So up to this point, I'm going to go ahead and close this. Up to this point, you'll notice that when I hover over things, nothing really happens. And that's because I haven't installed the Python extension that's available in VS Code. It's a very handy extension. It can do things like give you, well, frankly, IntelliSense. It's also really handy for doing a graphical debugger if you ever want to use that. There's just a lot of utility to it. So I'm going to show you how to set that up, but I'm also going to show you some of the pitfalls of doing that while using Pyenv, because as you'll see, IntelliSense does kind of need to know which version of Python you're running so that it can give you accurate information about what is available in that version of Python. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're just going to go over here to the extensions tab, and I'm going to look for Python. Hilariously, it is the very first thing that shows up. If it wasn't the very first thing, you could always just come up here and type Python, right? And it would search through the very large marketplace. Here it is. So I'm going to click install, and we're just going to wait a little bit for that to go ahead and install. Okay, now that that's installed, we can go back over here. I can close this window, right? And now that it's installed, you'll notice that if I go back here, I like to move this over a little bit. If I start hovering over things, I should start seeing, hey, there's the IntelliSense, right? So basically what IntelliSense is giving you is it's giving you sort of metadata about the language and giving you extra information that is very helpful while you're doing your development. So if you wanted to know all the different ways you could use this print function in Python, it's telling you right here, here's how it can be used. It even gives you some description, which is really awesome. And it can tell you things like maybe what this F does, or really, it's usually good for that. And it usually will pop up as you're doing your development. It can be very helpful. It could also help you find syntax errors, problems that are going to happen, that kind of stuff. One of the things about the Python extension in VS Code, though, is that it by default wants to integrate with your shell. So you'll notice the second that I got done installing the extension, notice what happened over here. You see that this thing is now in yellow, right? And if you hover over it, don't click it, but if you just hover over it, you'll notice the following extensions want to relaunch the terminal to contribute to its environment. So basically, this thing is wanting to integrate with my PowerShell instance. Now that sounds all well and good, but one of the problems with this is that it's going to end up starting to kind of do the same thing that I was complaining about earlier about how just the initial integration script that runs with VS Code also kind of makes things a little weird. A similar thing sort of happens here. Now in this situation, it's not the end of the world, but what it's really going to try to do is it's going to try to align the version of Pyenv, the version of Python that you're using right then, with the code that you're running in the editor. And that's not going to do such a great job of it. You can try to let it do it by hovering over this and just saying go ahead and relaunch the terminal. If you relaunch the terminal, okay, you're going to get in here. We can hit clear. Let's see what happens if I were to run python-v. Okay, it is using the correct version right here, but I've noticed that if you do certain things, so it starts to have a little bit of an issue. One of the things it's going to try to do is align the version of Python that you have and this number on the bottom right here. And you'll notice that right now, as soon as I got that extension installed, this showed up. And what it's basically doing is it's trying to figure out which version of Python you're using. And initially it did a pretty good job. It figured out that I was on 3.13. It used this to figure that out. Okay. The problem here is that whenever I switch, so let's say I go over here and I run a Pyenv shell again, and I say Pyenv shell 3.5.4, I believe it was. Okay. And then if I run Python v, I'm running 3.5.4, but look what didn't change. This is still running that. It's still running the previous version, still using 3.13, which means that it's not going to do IntelliSense correctly because it's using the wrong version, and it doesn't really align perfectly. So what you end up having to do is you kind of have to manually keep them in sync. So if I did something like this, which is a little uncommon, but if I did something like this, I would actually need to come over here, click the little numbers on the bottom. It actually will detect the versions of Python that you have installed on the machine using Pyenv, and you can manually just switch it over to a different version. Okay. And now notice that as soon as I did that, look what it did. Now I'm getting a little red squiggle over here telling me, hey, this isn't going to work because in 3.5 this F string. So this is kind of the utility of it, but you have to do it manually. So if I'm doing something down here, it doesn't necessarily align perfectly with this. You kind of have to, it's like a two-step process, right? So if you want to do it that way, that's fine. There are some situations that integration, the extension wanting to sort of integrate directly with your shell can be a little bit annoying and problematic. At least it's been my experience. So the last thing I'm going to show you is if you just want to make it so that it doesn't even try to do that, it doesn't try to integrate the extension with your shell at all, there's one last little setting in the JSONs file that you can do here. So I'm just going to put a comma here, and you can, if you want, just turn off the environment integration stuff entirely. And the way you would do it is you would just say python.terminal activate environment, and you can just set this to false. And if you do that, it basically will just not try to do that when you create a new environment. You can also set the Python terminal activate in the current terminal to false. If you save out of this, it will stop trying to do that. In general, all you're really ever going to do is you're probably not going to do what I just did here where you change the shell on your development environment. The most typical way a Python developer will do this is, we can just start from scratch here. I'll just get rid of this, and I'll get rid of this. Before they ever even launched their and I'll even close this. Before they ever even launched their project, they would have already established in Pyenv the local Python version that they want to use for that folder. And then they would, when they open it up, it should just automatically respect that version that you're on. So right now, it's still not doing that. And this is one of the issues, is that if I come in here and I run python-v, it's going to be using 3.13, but notice that down here it's not, right? So, and that might actually be because I changed it in the settings. So this is just me personally. You could leave that on. If you just got rid of the other one, it might work just fine. But I just switched it back over myself manually, and now it's using the correct version of Python along with the version that you want here. That is the way you can set it up. So with all that, you now have a complete package on using Pyenv for your Python development. Hopefully I've now walked through all of the ways that you can manage the different versions of Python on your system, on a Windows-based operating system, and giving you all of the information on how to switch back and forth between them seamlessly using Pyenv. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found the information helpful, and happy coding.